Alright, another draft physics type video. This will be a regarding, I suppose, just because it's sort of annoying. And, I try not to be obnoxious about it, but man, it's just so tedious. The false accusations made, it's just the arrogance of these people. They have a very weakly evidenced theory, and they're just dogmatically stating that you're crazy or you're somehow violated rational decency by not accepting their, I would argue, extraordinary explanation. And that's what these are, in my opinion. They're the opposite of the Occam's razor principle. Go for the most bizarre explanation rather than the simplest explanation. So, we're on the subject of time dilation, essentially. And first, this, recontextualization of Galileo, who just made a simple statement, just made from observation, that observationally, you can't tell what's moving in moving frames. It's the same difference. If I'm going 70 miles an hour and you're going 30 miles an hour the opposite way, it really doesn't matter whether I'm going 30 miles an hour and you're going 70 miles an hour. We can't see it any other way than 100 miles an hour. That's what it's going to look like when you add the two up. The product is going to be what we both see. We're going to both see the product of our combined velocities. Simple statement. It wasn't drawing any conclusions about anything bent or warped or any of that crap. Just the fact that the observer can't tell. That's it. That once he's moving with something, once he's gotten past the shock of acceleration, velocity is what it is. And people knew that from being on boats and trains and lots of mechanical devices. I didn't have trains back then, but yeah, you get the idea. So anyway, that acceleration gave it away. But once you had velocity, it was hard to tell you did unless there was something vibrating, something accelerating and deaccelerating. Anyway.
Is the guy that changed their frame, the person that came to your frame, that's...
Okay, so again, he's talking about these frames, and again, the only correlation that we know exists is the correlation between the function of matter, whether we're talking about radioactive decay or other types of metabolism of matter. I don't know what those might be. Even if I was to make a time clock, as I've stated before, if you try to put a time clock in a moving thing, the problem is if you're moving fast enough, your time clock won't even work, because the mirror you're going to bounce the photon off of is going to be moving away almost as fast as the photon is going across, and it won't hit the mirror anymore, and then your receiver won't receive the photon because the photon's going to land back there. So you have to put the receiver in a location that's distant from the emitter, which breaks your clock. Alright. Yeah, so let me...
The one that'll end up having had slower time.
Again, it has nothing to do with moving frames. It has to do with frames actually at velocity. So you have to be at a velocity, quote unquote, to have this effect.
The elements of this are confirmed in experiments that show there is time dilation.
Well, no one's arguing that there isn't effects, again. So he says it's time dilation in the sense that I will establish that anything that changes the emission of a radioactive, some radioactivity, the decay of an atom, anything that changes the decay of the atom is a change in its time. It can't change decay. So if you heated it and it decayed quicker, or you hit it with more neutrons and it decayed quicker, it's really, you've changed time. Because anything that changes how fast an isotope decays is automatically dilating time. Because all you have as evidence is a correlation between velocity and a delay in decay. Nothing else.
Yeah, someone can deny it.
Who's denying it? So again, this false accusation that somehow the evidence has been denied. What evidence do we have? We have muons flying through the atmosphere when they're hit by cosmic rays and they're accelerated to high speeds and they decay slower. So there's a correlation between velocity and slower radioactive decay. We have experiments with atomic clocks put in airplanes and driven around the Earth, and we have a little bit of decay change. So there's a correlation strictly between velocity and the rate of decay. What evidence am I denying in saying I can explain that with some other reason than it went into a time well? It fell into a time warp and time actually slowed down. But it wasn't ticking in the rest of the universe at exactly the same rate. That it somehow is cheating time.
But you can also accept the reality. The fact that denial is possible.
So again, another accusation. Just keep saying it, and so instead of saying there's alternative ways to explain it, and you don't have to be insane or crazy or unreasonable to say all we have is a correlation between a material change, that is, the matter changes associated with velocity. And because you have an association between a change in the function of matter and velocity, you're saying the time around that thing, or whatever that thing was in, the universe's clock ticks slower for it. And it, that's somehow real. That it's not just a consequence of a breakdown in its normal function. That it doesn't function normally at velocity. That's not a reasonable explanation.
Doesn't mean that you can't also accept reality.
So yes, I have to accept your explanation. That's all you're saying. Your explanation is now declared reality, and anyone who doesn't accept your explanation of a time well is somehow a reality denier. I mean, it's just bullshit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I wish more people realized that things started to get weird 400 years ago, except for nobody really took it literally, like the weird part of it. It was like, this is the way.
Well, again, I don't think it got weird. It's not weird to realize that you add velocities, just like you subtract them. There's nothing weird about realizing that if I'm on a train going 60 miles an hour and I throw a baseball 60 miles an hour in front of me, that the baseball will hit somebody on the ground at 120 miles an hour. That isn't strange. And that's all Galileo was saying. Velocities combine.
We look at it, and it was very, very successful. And then Einstein came along and said, wait, there's some weird ramifications of this. And those ramifications turned out to be reality.
Well, see again, it turned out to be reality. And their evidence is what? What evidence besides a correlation between velocity and a change in material function do you have? Where do you have any evidence beyond that? Beyond that being the thing that exists as the evidence. All we have as evidence is there's a relationship between velocity and certain material functions. And they're very specific material functions. If I put there's different timepieces, right? So if I take one of those sand hourglass, and I stick an hourglass in out to let's say 20,000 miles away from the Earth in an orbit of some kind. Just stick it out there. Now it's going to tell time really, really slow. I mean, the sand is barely going to go pushing through the thing because there's so little gravity. Just a little bit of sand will fall through, a little bit. And it'll seem like, well, time is really, really slow. Now, by theory, should I conclude that time is slower there? That in reality it's a time warp and that's the real time there? Or should I know that that's just a phenomenon based on the fact that there's no gravity pulling the sand through the glass anymore? It's just a consequence of the change in its position. It's change in its function based on the forces affecting it. And that when you have velocity, there's forces affecting you.
So overturning that is overturning 400 years of science.
Okay, so another bold statement. You're denying Galileo if you don't assume that Galileo really meant time dilation was a real thing. He really believed that there was frames of time, and you could bend time. You could break the rules of time. I don't think so.
Across the whole world, every nation and people. And the idea that they're in a big cabal because they all are the same kind of person.
Yeah, like there's not a cabal to believe in Jesus Christ or Mohammed. You just stepped right into it. Yes, it's a cabal of ignorance. What, do I think it's a conspiracy somehow? God is a conspiracy? No, it's just what dumb people do. And frankly, this grotesque exaggeration of your evidence to say that because there's an association between velocity and material functions, I must believe that it's time dilation. I mean, I must believe that the effect is because time has slowed down, and it's not because matter has changed.
And that wants to pretend that this is possible. No.
Well, it's also, he's going to bring up some point here about the clock fixing itself. Well, yeah, the point is, if I bring the sundial back down to Earth, it's not ruined. When I say time, it's broken as a clock, I just mean it can't function to reliably count light speed anymore. It's not being compared to light speed. Do you think right next to the hourglass sitting, and so if I put the hourglass way out there, and then I shoot photons back and forth right next to it, do you think the photons are going to tell the same time as the hourglass? Do you think they're in the same time warp? No, they're not.
And that's the whole point, too, with Einstein. People were not eager to go. There were plenty of people that were like, that's woo-woo stuff. Way more than Einstein. Einstein said that kind of about quantum mechanics with it.
Yeah, well, again, and I'm saying that it's a good point to make, that it seems like kind of an extraordinary explanation that there's somehow this bending structure built into the universe that somehow makes stuff fall into other stuff. Like there's a pulling force or a bunch of strings pulling everything in, and there's no string roller. There's no energy source to be doing all this pulling. It is a kind of a wacky thing to say, in my opinion, worthy of criticism.
A lot of people said that about Einstein. These are crazy ideas.
Yeah, and they haven't been proven. Again, there's an association between a concept of gravity. That means that material bodies in free space will gravitate, move towards each other. Now, that's what you have as evidence. There's no evidence that bent space is causing it. That's just your explanation. And there's other explanations, like mock gravity, all right, that I can defend, I think, quite reasonably.
We like Newton, where there's gears and BBs and bullets and bouncing things.
Well, again, it isn't all about bouncing. It's just so much about interacting, because things don't really bounce. And that's kind of the silly part here, is that you people seem quite comfortable with this idea of a bouncing. You think you can shoot photons through a mirror and they just bounce off the mirror. When I think if you do real physics, they don't just bounce off. They interact with the material. They become part of it, and then they're readmitted. And you just deny all of that when it's convenient.
Billiard balls going into pockets and whatnot. Predictable forever. They didn't, the establishment, the majority didn't want that. But
the majority didn't want that. Then I don't know why it got voted for. So obviously the majority ended up wanting it. I don't even know what that means. The majority of physicists did want an ether theory, actually. They were all kind of fans of it.
They have an established way of demonstrating things to each other. They had to accept the evidence before their...
Okay, now and again, the evidence of what? a simple correlation. So because Earths fall into suns, I must accept the existence of Einstein's bent space. It can be the only way that an Earth can get pushed into a sun. It's quite obviously the only possible explanation. No, there's absolutely no evidence that it's the only possible explanation. None.
That time and space and mass all distort with velocity.
Well, again, so time, space, and mass all distort with velocity. And I would argue you can't distort mass because mass is quanta and you can't do that. What you do is you change how much of it's in a dimension. So, but you can't undo the mass. You can't distort it in some way. It's the quantity. The quantity is the quantity. You can't undo the quantity. So I'd say even your own quantum mechanics theories say that's not possible. So wrong way to say it, and to say it with such arrogance that this has been proven. Where's the proof?
Velocities. The clocks don't get broken. Because
they don't tell time well. I'm just saying I can put clocks in all kinds of environments. I can take a watch and put it in the ocean. It ain't going to tell time anymore. I can change the environment that something's in and change its function. So the real argument being made here is we use one kind of clock, essentially, radioactive decay. And you're saying because velocity affects radioactive decay, I must believe the item falls into a time dimension. And I can argue that if you use a light clock or some other clock, I can show you how your light clock isn't going to work if you're moving at substantial speeds. It will be broken. It can't function unless you disassemble it and change the way it functions. If the emitter is right next to the receiver, you will, and the mirror is exactly above across from, and you move it half the speed of light horizontally, your photon won't hit the mirror and it will never get back to the receiver because the material's moving. The mirror's moving out of the way faster than the photon can get there. Fact. Your clock will be broken and it'll work again just fine if you go back to normal speed or low speed. Fact. And you're just claiming that the facts are something else without proving them to be something else.
But then they've done experiments. You got an atomic clock in the ground. It has some distortion because of its gravitational.
Again, he keeps just pointing out that the proof is the correlation between velocity and a change in radioactive decay. So because there's a change in radioactive decay when you accelerate a radioactive piece of matter and give it velocity, that therefore we have proven that there's a time dimension and you can bend it and warp it. I'd say that's an amazing leap. I'd say that's like saying giraffes are proof that God exists.
You put someone up in a different gravitational well and go really fast, and then land one, and that was the acceleration when it landed. The one that lands and joins the ground one, it went slower. It's behind. It didn't break. You can look at it, it's just as operational as ever.
Yes, like I can take an hourglass into space and it doesn't work, and then I can bring it back and it works just fine. Change in conditions, change in function. Yeah, okay, that's silly talk. It's obviously not a change in function. No, it's a change in the time dimension.
It didn't hurt it. People in the space station whizzing around thousands of miles an hour, they're not breaking.
Well, there's lots of evidence that they are, actually. That's not very good for you. And there's also, but there's also no evidence that they're cryogenically not aging or something.
And then auto repairing when they land. Right? Photons are not bullets. turns.
You can keep saying you are going to declare this is the truth, and then you're going to be obnoxious when somebody even just suggests there might be a better way to look at it. All right, but I'll arrogantly just say it back at you. Yes, they are, silly person. You've got the wrong answer. Your God doesn't exist. There's a theory of evolution that ties it all together and keeps it all quite mechanical, quite physical. Physics is physical, as it turns out. It has nothing to do with all your silly, poofy, wavy bullshit. It's all about physical things doing standard physical things. And there's absolutely no ESP. There's no, I'm just going to jump out of the way. There's no any bullshit. It's all mechanical things doing mechanical things. That's how it turns out. It's all evolution. No gods needed.
They're not water waves. They are in this weird relativistic medium known as the electromagnetic field.
Okay, so now he's going to say, Einstein, no, it's not bent space, it's the bent electromagnetic field. That's the one that's tied to time now. So apparently that's the new theory.
And it's a fair name, because even though there's a lot of things still to learn about how it works and how it might be unified with other things, which I suspect.
Right, and there's even though there's absolutely no evidence that this field exists to be perpetrated true, that you actually have to make the field. You have to create the field.
But maybe not. But the part that we see and call that already exists. It might be the part of a bigger whole. It might be.
Well, like I said, so it's not virtual photons then. So Feynman was wrong about that part. So magnetism and electricity isn't best described by creating a force carrier. It's best described by creating the electromagnetic field and then just pushing waves that don't spread, right? Quanta waves through it. Oh, yeah, right.
Be different than we think, but
even though the electromagnetic stuff really doesn't do any of this, whatever it is, quantum craziness.
It is what's behind electric and magnetic forces. And
again, this is the truth. I'm telling you the truth. I have it. It's the truth. And what do they have? Okay, there's a correlation between radioactive decay and velocity. So if I found a correlation between heat and radioactive decay, that would mean that heat is warping time. Is that how it works?
That is what a photon is an electromagnetic wave.
Again, that doesn't wave. That's a corpuscle in every respect. In terms of its absolute function, its end result is it's a quanta of energy, and it's a quanta of energy that doesn't spread.
And it runs in a sort of ethereal.
Right, okay, God. It goes to God's house, gets its instructions, and, its wings, and does its little angel thing.
Relativistic medium, which we call right now the electromagnetic.
Yeah, we call it. So yes, him and all the other people call it this electromagnetic field now that we are to believe exists right now. There's a field, and it's not that the field is made of stuff moving. No. Not that it's a field full of moving things that are polarized. No. That you change the nature of the field that's emanating, the active field. No, it's some kind of dead field, and you vibrate things through it that don't spread.
Field.
I mean, they don't spread until you want them to, of course. When they find a slit, then they go all loopy. Guess that's it. The slow ending.
Alright, cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Fuck that shit. Anyway, but there, you just can't get, you're denying the evidence if you recognize the evidence, and then if you dare to say something like, well, the evidence is a correlation between velocity and radioactive decay, and you're saying I must conclude that time is a warpable dimension because there's a relationship between radioactive decay and velocity. And if I don't, I'm the truther. I'm the crazy UFO theory person. Yeah. Not a fair cop.